So we're here tonight with Brian Docherty, who works for Northwest Cultural Partnership and was an inaugural member of the Policing Board, and Mickey Gallagher, who is a member of the 32 County Sovereignty Movement, a lifelong Republican activist and a political ex-prisoner.
You're very welcome, folks, and thank you for taking time out of your no doubt busy schedules to be here in the bunker. Tonight we're going to be discussing policing, and since this week it seems to be more topical than usual, I'm going to start off by a question that has been asked by a member of the public, and it is effectively, since the name change from the RUC to PSNI, has there been increased support from working class areas? So, do you want to go first, Mickey or Brian, whoever?
Go ahead, Brian.
It's an interesting question, Gary. I remember a way back whenever Patton was doing his consultation, and across Northern Ireland, including working class loyalist areas, I think there was a huge sense from within loyalism that we should be defending RUC. And I remember being at a public meeting that I think Patton was at himself, and it was attended by RUC officers that time, and what struck my mind was that the RUC themselves members were basically wishing the Patton recommendations through, because I think they saw it as an opportunity to get out and get a huge payoff. And I remember myself and another fella standing up and saying, well, if you can't defend your own RUC, what point do we have doing it? So we walked out, actually. But it always struck me that, that I think at that time,
did you see it as an attack on the RUC?
I think at that time we did, but as I say, we felt that, it's almost like supporting any authority or public service that maybe go on strike. We're there in solidarity, and we're there to kind of defend the principles, the old RUC, the sacrifice and that they made. But it was quite obvious that the RUC themselves were quite happy with the changes, because it was beneficial financially in other ways to them, so at that time. And then you got to remember the context of that, I suppose, and just after the Good Friday Agreement 25 years ago, the old RUC was largely made up, as we all know, of largely Protestant members. Most of them were based within loyalist working class estates, with family members who were involved in it. So we saw them as a genuine support mechanism and comfort to attacks by the IRA or any kind of Republican paramilitary activity. So at that time, we kind of felt that there was a bit of a betrayal, that these sweeping changes were happening, and that the old RUC were kind of being discarded. So at that time, it was a huge shock culturally to the Protestant community. And then, as it turned out, one of the recommendations talked about an independent accountability body, the Northern Ireland Policing Board, and it was actually appointed as an independent member. Turned out to be the youngest member in it at that time. So it was, a huge period of structural change at that time.
Do you think that finance was the main motivation for the lack of maybe resistance from RUC personnel? Because I think a lot of RUC personnel, once they got the payoffs, then rejoined the PSNI. Is that a bit of, did it just happen that way, or did
they joined largely in civilian roles? I mean, there's no doubt that the financial incentives were great, but I mean, that a huge. I mean, but saying that, it's okay for me to say that. I wasn't maybe a policeman for 30 years in the height of the Troubles, so maybe some of them felt it because of the stress levels and because of everything else. This was an opportune time to get out. I do remember, though, at that time, that whole structural change had a huge impact really on how policing panned out, because you've got to remember, most of the people who took up the payoff packages had years upon years of policing experience, so a lot of skills and experience were kind of lost at that time.
Yeah. Constitutional nationalists would have seen that as a good thing, that we're getting rid of, we have a new beginning here. We're getting rid of the old RUC, and some people sold it within nationalism as some type of victory of a change. Would that be, Mickey, your analysis? Or
well, at the time, as a Republican, probably the conversations amongst Republicans at that time, our political convictions led us to believe that it doesn't matter what you call them, what type of uniform they wore, that they could run around with green, white and orange uniforms and call themselves an Irish title, as long as they were commissioned from London. and they had the MI5 connection, and they were here to serve British interests in Ireland, that wouldn't matter. But we were watching to see how would it play out, because they had the backing at the time of the SDLP and the church and all of them people, and laterally then Sinn Féin. So we were interested to see what they would do, or how would they try and sell themselves as something different. But it didn't happen. They changed the colour of the Jeeps, they changed the name, but by and by their activities were the same house raids, same harassment. And I would sit here with confidence and say that in working class areas, nobody has seen any change in policing in the North. Now, as a Republican, we were political in our convictions, we no way, but we thought that maybe some nationalists might take the advice of, and in particular Sinn Féin, when they accepted policing in the North, British policing in the North, but it failed. It didn't
it wasn't
happen.
a case of sticking a few Castle Catholics, bringing numbers of Catholics up, and everything's going to be.
Is it a class issue more than it is?
It probably is, but it was at the time it was touted that they were going to bring Catholics and recruit Catholics on. There'd be a 50-50 recruitment and all that there. And again, as Republicans, we're politically convinced that any sort of force commissioned and sent from Whitehall or Westminster or wherever it may be in England,
religion is of no importance.
it has no consequence whatsoever. Doesn't matter who it is. But we were wondering how they would dress it up, and they're pretty successful in their propaganda efforts at times. But at this time it just didn't, nothing changed. There was nobody convinced. Even the people in the past, the middle class Catholic type people, we thought, oh, we see their approach, so it'll be aggressively championing them. But it didn't come.
What about you, Brian? How did you see it panning out? Was Patton the beginning of Reformation? Where's it at now, particularly amongst unionism? Have they seen any changes, and if there has been changes, are they seeing them as positive or progressive?
It's interesting what Mickey says around the class issues. That was certainly the huge shift and change I've seen. I suppose when I talked earlier on about most PSNI officers being within kind of working class loyal estates, they weren't really, because it was such a high paid job. Most of them moved out to suburbs anyway. They might have originated from the working class areas, but quite quickly, maybe because security reasons as well, moved out into leafy suburbs, many of them. But the big element, where I see where the dynamic changed, was, I think, around the fact, after Patton, it was quite clear. I mean, it wasn't a secret at all. It was quite an open kind of strategic choice by the high-ranking officers within the PSNI to kind of concentrate more resources on winning over nationalism. And it was about as blunt as that, because if you remember, in the early days of the policing board, it took another 6-7 years before Sinn Féin endorsed it, So what that did, it needed to be done, I suppose, when you look at trying to incorporate an inclusive and welcoming police service. Because let's face it, every civilised society needs a police service of sorts, and I don't think anyone disagreed with the fact that there was a body of work to be done to try and improve confidence within particularly working class nationalist areas. But what quite quickly happened, actually, and quite clearly happened, was that created a disconnect with working class loyalism, because and that tied in as well with how
you sort of suggesting like two tier.
Yeah, I mean, now, yeah, certainly, but you could see the kind of beginnings of that from then. All of a sudden, we got to remember that generally, most people kind of were quite happy to see police officers walking the street and walking the beat and keeping crime down. Ironically, as we moved into kind of a more peaceful society, we kind of inherited or developed kind of common social issues that you see in every country in the world, in every city in the UK, Ireland, or America, or wherever. All of a sudden, drugs became more prevalent. And one of ironically, the benefits of the Troubles was that between the saturation security forces, be it the army or the police or paramilitaries, drugs wasn't an issue. Nor was break-ins, nor was generalised crime. Communities internally within themselves, parochially, were very safe.
Yeah, they policed themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, they policed themselves. So whenever we moved into kind of more normal society, and all of a sudden these localised crime issues became more prevalent, drugs became more prevalent, we had loyalist where Protestant areas were saying, hang on, where's the cops? Why aren't they in the street? Why aren't they dealing with us? So they started to get a bit disillusioned anyway, because the numbers were just for a start, because of the financial cutbacks, because a lot of resources were going into trying to win over nationalist areas. There was just less prevalence of police. So
Do you think
localised
that's
crime went
worked,
up.
in your opinion, that trying to win over nationalist areas? Has it worked, or
It hasn't worked in working class nationalist areas. I mean, it's quite obvious. I mean, I think that, I have my own opinions on the 50-50 recruitment. I think it's wrong. Any form of discrimination is wrong. But I think what happened was that most of the recruits were graduates and middle class Protestants and Catholics. So you came into it with not a disdain for working class areas, but certainly a lack of knowledge as to what the issues were in working class areas. So there was that kind of disconnect as well. You had new recruits coming in with this idealistic overview of what community policing should be about, citing motorcycles and chatting to kids, and the reality was very different. So what quite quickly happened, if you go forward 20, 30, 40 years or up to now, I mean, I know there's a wee bit of ball in the Craigan today, but I can guarantee if the police were in Tullyalley tonight, you'd have the same problems.
Yeah, well, there was reactions in Tullyalley within the last couple of years where, working class Protestants, unionists were heavily involved in engaging with and attacking them. So there's obviously, and that was only a couple of years ago, and I mind you on the radio talking about that.
And we did our homework in respect of trying to get to the bottom of that, and what we were told was that there was a sense within working class loyalist areas that the police are more heavy-handed in those areas. Whether that is the case or not, that's the perception, and that was enough for the police to be seen as being unwelcome and attacks happening whenever they arrive.
Mickey, would you say that's the same perception within Republican?
I think the problem was what Brian was saying regards working class areas and all that, is that divide was still there, so there weren't too much interactions between Protestant working class areas and nationalist Republican working class areas. And what has happened is the narrative in the media was that the RUC or the PSNI is playing the nationalists and all that. There was in working class areas wasn't happening. We were just getting the same old, and
they weren't even trying it.
Because what I might looking at a museum union saying, or the thing was nationalists are getting everything. The PSNI are pro nationalists, and we would find this almost hysterical. That you might have had an odd headline in the Irish News, or you had the church, or the SDLP, and then even Sinn Féin in later years. Bar Sinn Féin, the other two were always champions of RUC. So nothing's changed really, bar Sinn Féin.
So why did Sinn Féin change?
Sinn Féin had to change because of the deal they done with the British government for political expediency, even though they knew they were in trouble doing it, and they did get into trouble electorally at the time for it, and they lost a lot of support. They lost a lot of grassroots support. They lost a lot of old Republican families who were involved in that old Republican network, and they done it because they promised the British government that, or the British government had a barrel, because they couldn't hold out any longer. And as you say, Brian, I think it was 6 years later, whatever, they endorsed their 5, whatever it was. They knew they were in trouble, but they done it then because either the British said, "Time's up, boys. Either play ball, or you don't." Or,
did Sinn Féin endorsing the PSNI have any impact within loyalist or unionist communities?
No, yeah, I think it did. I think people were, secretly impressed. I remember, from a personal perspective, I remember going to an event at Sinn Féin, it must have been the Sinn Féin Ardèche, in the Millennium Forum, just before they endorsed policing, and Martin McGuinness led the discussion. And whether he knew that there was unionists there or not, it was me and maybe one or two others when he went out of curiosity. But I was personally hugely impressed as his leadership. He was getting stick from the floor, and when he was kind of trying to win, it was kind of the final steps.
Surely you would be impressed. Here's somebody who's thrown to the, cast off a very fundamental Republican ideal or principle that I'm now going to support British policing in Ireland.
Exactly.
If I was a unionist,
regardless of whether you Republicans or all of them agreed with him or not, the bottom line was it was incredible. It was an incredible feat of leadership, and I remember coming out of it thinking, Jesus, I wish we had leaders like that in the unionist community. So at that time, from a personal perspective, I was impressed by his leadership. I mean, what they did, I mean, it was a U-turn, I suppose, when you look politically at where they'd come from, where they help policing. I mean, at that time, you got to remember as well, we were still very much in the honeymoon period in Northern Ireland. You know, after the Good Friday Agreement, everyone was hugging each other and really willing to push boundaries, and you know, so it was like, let's make this policing thing work. You know, so it was an easier environment in that respect, and that kind of reflected many, I suppose, my years within the policing board itself as well. It was new. It was at that time, the Stormont had been suspended because of the Northern Bank robbery, and you know, so we were the only show in town. So all of a sudden, the media were into it, and the politicians were loving the exposure, and it was all kind of new and fresh. And Sinn Féin kind of moving on to that was just another kind of landmark, or seen as a landmark in terms of the peace process. Whether it made a difference, I don't know. I mean,
do you think it was cynical on Sinn Féin's behalf?
I think. I mean, I don't know enough about Sinn Féin, but I mean, my impression was, you know, it was you know, quite a huge risky step to make, just to be cynical, you know, and there's no doubt, you know, the 50-50 recruitment must have worked, you know, because the numbers applying maybe after that hugely increased.
Just on that, like, and again, at times I would wonder, this 50-50 recruitment, 50 Catholic, 50% Protestant, it's almost a slit on Protestantism. You know, as 100%. Mickey outlined, and I agree 100%, religion is of no significance on when you're in a police force, or if you're in an army. It should have no bearing. But if you were Protestantism shouldn't be equated with the ills of the RUC. You know, and on what there was this simplistic, get more Catholics and less Protestants, and it will somehow.
It was the worst thing about Patton. It was a lot of things I didn't agree with Patton, but that was the one I thought, you know, was completely out of order, was unjustified. You know. So you look at how it practically worked out. You know, young people were grouped together. They went through all the recruitment, 4 or 5 stages of the recruitment process, and they looked at the ones who were deemed good enough to join the PSNI, and then they went back and seen where they went to primary school, and they went, oh, that boy must be a Protestant, so away he goes. You know, and like, just to kind of finish that very briefly, I remember there was a young fella, I'm not mentioning names, but his father was an RUC officer, and he was killed by IRA in Derry in the 80s, and he applied for, only ever wanted to be a police officer, got turned down because his religion, had to move, joined a police service in England, and is now a sergeant major or something. You know, so and that young person, you know, he was basically denied his career, had to move out of the country because of, you say, the ills or whatever of the old RUC, or the sins of their forefathers, whatever way you want to term it. You know, so any form of discrimination, positive or nothing, in 2021.
Just like the fact of Protestantism, and there's a lot of progressive things about Protestantism, even from a Republican point of view. I think, you know, it's very simplistic to say we just need more Catholics. It's slit, you know, Protestantism isn't responsible for what the RUC, in my opinion, what the RUC were doing to a community, or you know.
But as a Republican, what Brian just said about 50% Protestant, 50% Catholic, police is a symptom of a state, and we oppose the 6 county state, and we oppose the police because it's like this armed militia connected to it. But as a Republican too, we oppose sectarianism, and the reason we oppose the 6 county state is because it's institutionalised sectarian head count, and as you said, you're opposed to that in the police. So Republicans would have been, because the 6 county state, as it's formatted, is a Catholic, Protestant, orange green sort of thing, which will keep us like this forever and a day. Do you know what I mean?
And that's why it was, from a Republican perspective, that's why it was created. 50% Protestant, 50% Unionist. Sorry, 50% Protestant, 50% Catholic, 100% Unionist. Is that an accurate statement?
And Republicans' eyes would be.
Yeah. What about yourself, Brian? Would you see that? Is there nationalists? Is there contradiction in terms of you know, is it 100% Unionist force because of it was, I don't know if it's changed, but it was Her Majesty's Constabulary. It was there to protect the Union with Great Britain. That's
pro-state.
the fun, yeah.
By the nature of
so
policing.
Is it a Unionist force, or how would you, as a Unionist?
No, I mean, it's what I said earlier on. You know, in any modern civilized country needs a police service. I mean, I don't know, if you were to flip that to the Guards and decide that there wasn't enough proportional representation from Protestants in the south, do you go through the same process? So I don't know whether it was as much, around equality and employment opportunity as making or kind of trying to force the PSNI into looking as if it was balanced, which is different from, providing opportunity for young Catholics, because it was always open for young Catholics to apply, and some did.
But you had to be a unionist.
Well, you had to be a unionist, but I mean, it's but in name only. You were still there to kind of serve and protect your own communities in Northern Ireland.
So how has it worked out? Where are we at now? Has the fundamental change, the reform, has it kicked in? Is it?
It seems in a pretty bad state. I'd love to be a fly in the wall in the policing board meetings now, and I think a lot of the creeks, have been allowed to build up for a couple of reasons over the last number of years. I think that continual emphasis on winning over nationalism has never changed. I think that's shown by the fact that most of the chief constables brought in are from England, and I have to say that I think that the current chief constable has kind of bent over backwards. I mean, he spent most of his time apologising. You tie that on, then there's always been a disconnect between the officers on the ground and the strategic command anyway. That was made worse by the cutbacks and reduction in numbers. So I speak to many police officers. I'm friendly with many, and it's no secret that morale's at an all-time low. Many of them are on the sick. Many of them have no intention of going back. And how the chief constable conducted himself with the two officers in Belfast was the final straw in terms of whether the officers were right or wrong and what they did. They were thrown under a bus by the guy that was there to protect them, and that so that was irretrievable in my book, and was irretrievable when it happened 2 years ago. So it was always inevitable, and I think, in my opinion, and the fact that it's happened now and they're in turmoil is no surprise.
Interesting. Sinn Féin, a lot of grassroots Sinn Féin people, when you're talking to them, will tell you that they don't support policing. Whatever the leadership says, you be aware of that. You have the same conversations.
Well, Brian alluded to it in our days when he said that McGuinness was getting...
when he was getting heckled or
which doesn't really happen.
It's very, very difficult to get grassroots Sinn Féin supporters. They say, yes, I support policing, and here's why. In the current context, I agree, we do need a policing system but Sinn Féin have been telling people, it's and the nudge, wink, wink. We will have so much power. We will be able to sack a chief constable. We will put manners on them. But here's an incident where it's been claimed that Sinn Féin have put pressure on the chief constable in order to take action of what happened in Normal Road. And what happened in Normal Road, I think was wrong, completely wrong. There was people commemorating deaths of loved ones by an armed loyalist group who the allegations were there was collusion between them and the police. At the same time, we had Pitt Park, where dozens of masked loyalists were brushing past PSNI officers in Anham. But what sticks out in this for me is that, with all that talk, Sinn Féin will put manners on them. When this was come out, Sinn Féin were at pains. They say, no, we didn't. Oh, we didn't put any pressure. It's the complete opposite of what people on the ground
were told at the time.
Yeah, and I think the dog in the street, even from the union's perspective, would have realised that too. So I think the fact that the chief constable then was thrown under the bus by Sinn Féin as well as everybody else, kind of was the final nail in his coffin. Really, I think there's no comeback from that after that.
But was he? Did they not defend him originally? Did they not defend him?
I wasn't privy to the policing board meetings, obviously, but I mean, it seemed to me by the fact that the very long policing board meeting was it last week, he came out unscathed, and he came back. He came out pretty buoyant and said he was going to appeal the frigging court decision.
So does it look like all this is just tacked on following the data breach as sort of additional things? You
had all that, but I mean, my expectation was he was going to go after the first emergency police board meeting, but he came back, I had to say, strutting out with, obviously during that he'd got the support of everyone in there, and then the fact, I think a huge own goal by him was then to say he was going to appeal the court decision which he had agreed a couple hours before, and that then got the Police Federation really on his back, so there was no comeback from that then, you know.
We have another member of the public asking a question, which is, does taxpayers' contributions in terms of hundreds of thousands of pounds towards the Police and Community Safety Partnership, does it represent value for money, or is it merely just a vanity project?
Well, I definitely believe it's a vanity project. As I say, nothing's changed. If you look at Craig and the night, there's young people out throwing stones, and I can't understand how, when councils are going bust, when austerity's hitting hard, how we're paying money for something that's not tangible, or you can't see no benefit of it on the street. Like they said they're there, they liaise with the community and the police. I've never seen them in this area. I don't know where the money's going or what it's there for.
Well, some of the money was going to bottles or for alcohol, for prizes for vulnerable adults. It was going for plane tickets, and when questioned, they didn't know who was on the plane, who it was for. There was all sorts of, was given to groups who was no checks and balances. They didn't even know if they were a charity. They didn't even know if the bank account corresponded. It was just a case that there's hundreds of thousands of pounds of taxpayers' money being handed to whoever wanted it, as long as they could put a PCSP stamp on it.
Wow.
And nationalism just seemed to
let it go.
And behind it, there's nobody, in my opinion, challenging the pace now. Like you've seen the rage, you've seen the. You said earlier, Mickey, they're not even trying. They don't care. They seem to not care.
If you look at this council area, what needs money? It's definitely not that anyway. I think any right thinking person would say that.
I think you got to look back as to where these PCSPs came from. I mean, going back to the patent recommendations, I mean, it's hard to argue that the PSNI are the most accountable police force in the world by a mile. I mean, you've got.
You think they are? Yeah.
Well, you've got the policing board. You've got above that, you've got the Ombudsman office, and then you've got an oversight commission that looks at oversees all those structures below it. And then regionally, you had what were old district policing partnerships, which are now the PCSPs. So the whole constituent network was designed to kind of get right into the communities and then have oversight people that were making sure that what they were doing was effective and right. And I think the PCSPs have kind of lost a bit of that direction. I don't. You never hear of. I mean, how effective they are. I mean, the old district policing partnerships were quite good in terms of consultation and holding the district commander to account. When the meetings were well attended and the people were asking some really hard, serious questions. Now it just seems to be a coordinating body for small scale funding. There doesn't seem to be any kind of accountability mechanism there anymore, or any opportunity to really question the police. They will send their second, third in command to with a kind of standard monthly report, glossy monthly report, and away they go. So there's no real serious question or accountability.
That must have happened in the Loyalists and Protestant community, because it didn't happen in this community. I mean, one time Sinn Féin went to flex their muscles at one time, and the police, I can't remember now, it's a number of years ago, they've done something that nobody agreed with, even they all came out and condemned it, and they went to bring it up, we'll take it up with them, and it was actions of a divisional mobile support unit or something, and they were told by the local commander in Derry that we have no jurisdiction over them people, they're outside our remit, they're under a different, probably from higher up the.
Well, 40% of the budget is run
from
by
MI5.
MI5, British intelligence.
No, I'm not saying what Brian's saying is wrong in his community, but it's definitely not in this community. Do you know what I mean? It's.
So
no, I mean 100%.
There is two-tier policing in that respect as well.
But I mean, a lot of twos depends on the effectiveness of the representation that are on these boards and how accountable they want to hold the police to. But I mean, in saying that, I think a lot of the issues around policing now are largely structural. But there can be huge benefits. I mean, two weeks ago, for example, in Newgate, we at the Londonderry Bands Forum organised a meeting with the PSNI in advance of the 12th August parade. So we had the bands, great representation from the bands, the stewards were there as well, the apprentice boys were there, and the PSNI were there talking about their role in the upcoming parade. And the two guys, the two community policemen, were fantastic. They were really interactive. They got a tough time, from particularly the bandsmen, but they were able to handle it. And I think they were genuine in terms of what they were trying to do, which was trying to kind of rebuild that trust, between the PSNI, the stewards and the bands, because that had broken down as well. I mean, at that time, there was an ongoing perception or an agenda. We felt there was an agenda in parade, and it's kind of starting to become prevalent in Derry now, where people are coming along and trying to break the ranks of the bandsmen, and then videoing it and making it look as if there was aggression showing and so on. We were aware that there was 4 or 5 incidents in Derry over the last 2 years where that's quite blatantly happened. A car drove into the Burnt Hullet band in Spencer Road last year, for example. So we brought the police together to say, look, whose responsibility is it and how do we react if this happens on Saturday? And the police were very good in that. So there are examples of practically they want to help, but again, structurally it's very difficult because they're stretched. You were kind of get a follow-up meeting, but it's very difficult because the 2 officers are away in Timbuktu doing something else. And then obviously when you build up a relationship, for those who do want to build up a relationship with a community cop, they're moved to somewhere else. And then of course the data breach is going to make that a lot worse now as well, because it'll be moving around everywhere.
If we're to finish on a positive note, where globally in the world would you say is an example of policing in action that works, that is community supported, that is a good model?
I wouldn't have too much dealings, but I think any police force has to come from the community. It has to come from the people that's in that community. It can't come from some autocrat or somebody sitting in Whitehall or somebody well paid who doesn't care about the Shankill Road, about the Fountain, about the Falls Road, about the Craigan, and sitting going dismissive. And I think that's what the problem is fundamentally, that it has to come with these communities and have the support of these communities, and it clearly doesn't, not in this community anyway.
I don't know if there's anywhere in the world doesn't have its problems, but I know we certainly should be comparing ourselves to the United States. I remember again going back to the early days, the policing board, the NYPD took us over to try and teach us about policing, like the NYPD,
But
they're mostly Irish as well.
Yeah, they're Irish, but they're racist. Do you know what I mean?
And Boston police. I mean, when you look now at hindsight in 20 years since, and you see where the police in this United States, and they weren't exactly the model of good practice.
But that's just like everything else. I heard guys in the Irish, but they're racist. But somebody could go into any police force in the world well intentioned, but the system's going to turn them out, or him or her out.
Just when you're saying that, here that there's been charm offensives by nationalism, by the church, by that, and we see photographs of British police officers going into schools and young kids looking through the scopes of high-powered rifles and that. It's but disingenuous. No matter what, there are a few on policing. It's not. There's huge, let's put it mildly, health and safety aspects, which I have no doubt. As in, is there a moral issue regarding that?
The church and people like that. There's little people saying that we should take the gun out of Irish politics for the future, and then they're encouraging people to carry guns, and whether you like it or not, that's what they're doing.
Well, they don't tell them children that if they're coming from a nationalist or Catholic or Republican background, that if you join that police force, that they will be ostracised by their community, that they will have to check under their car every morning, that they could be in danger, that for family get-togethers, whether it be weddings or christenings or whatever, that they won't be able to attend them. So there's in my opinion, there's a huge moral issue regarding that. Whatever your opinion is on British police.
Well, it's like asking anybody to take on a role, you have to be aware of the dangers. And it seems that they're quite clearly looking to look over that for political expedience again. I think that's the whole issue.
And I think, Gary, I don't think it's anywhere near as attractive a career as it was 10-15 years ago. 10-15 years ago, well, longer, there was a lot of demand to join the PSNI or RUC, largely because it was a hugely well paid job, the best paid police service in the whole of the world, probably, comparatively, and that isn't the case anymore. It's a pretty crap paid job. And then if you add on then all the other pressures that you mentioned, and I'm sure, they're not naive enough to know all of those, so it's been very difficult to recruit, and recruit high quality officers who then stay there. Retention's another huge issue, and if you look at the sickness levels, and per year, it's nowhere. It's like the whole structure around it is crumbling, and that's nothing really not as much to do with the security threat or any of that. It's just the kind of as an organisation and a structure, they're huge feelings there at the minute too.
Yeah. Look, in my opinion, when you look at these people who are cheerleaders for policing, very few of their own children take that path. We know that within nationalism. It reminds me of, like these there was a somebody done a documentary in America where they were sending their sons and daughters to Iraq and Afghanistan as cannon fodder, but when it was asked how many of the people who were voting for war there are very, very few of their children were in armed forces and that. But there's also, there may be a case that some people may be joining this, but there's legacy issues too. There's current issues where we look at the whole issues regarding Noah Donoghue, when we look at legacy issues, with inquests and that, and Arlene, all of the Arlene Arkeson with the agent that was involved in that. There's still a lot of these is being sort of suppressed,
And the PSNI is responsible for it. No, I mean it's.
I think too, interesting what you're saying there, Gary. I mean, those young Protestants who would have felt an allegiance to the Crown and working class loyalist areas, they're still joining the army, but they're not joining the police. So something different. So they don't see the same British connection anymore to the police the way they might have 20, 30 years ago. So they're quite happy to be the cannon fodder in Syria or Iraq or wherever, or Afghanistan, but they won't.
Why do you think that is? What made the differential between the two?
Largely because I think that disconnect the sense of two-tiered policing, how they see it on the ground. They see it, as an authoritarian figure that's oppressing them on their doorstep, whereas join the army and going to fight abroad is, far better representation of your sovereignty and sense of British identity.
I think we're running out of time now, guys, so we just want to say thanks very much for coming on to talk to us, and we really welcome your input.
Interesting, we must do it again. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, folks.